The village of Hollow Reach had 41 people in it the night before, and the watch commander counting bodies in the grey dawn kept losing his count at 19 because his hands would not stop shaking long enough to finish. Nothing had come ashore in a ship. That was the detail that would haunt the inquiry for weeks afterward, the detail no one could make sit still in their mind, no matter how many times they turned it over. No sail had been sighted. No hull had grounded on the rocks. Whatever had come to Hollow Reach had come the way the tide comes, quietly, from everywhere at once, already inside the walls before anyone thought to ask how. The survivors, the few who could speak at all, did not describe soldiers. They described something that walked like a person and moved like weather. A shape that would stand perfectly still for the length of a held breath, and then simply not be where it had been standing, and be somewhere much closer, all in the space between two heartbeats. They described eyes that had forgotten how to be afraid of anything, because fear requires believing you might lose something, and these things did not seem to believe they had ever had anything to lose. One old fisherman, found alive under his own collapsed roof, said the truest thing anyone would say about that night, and he said it in a voice gone flat, with a shock too large to fit inside ordinary grief. "It wasn't killing us like an animal kills," he said. "It was killing us like a child pulls the legs off something, to see what it does. Curious. That's the word. It was curious about dying, and it used my whole village to find out the answer." Those who could still walk did not wait for the riders. By mid-morning, the road to Blackflint's harbour was already thick with what remained of Hollow Reach. Mothers carrying children too shocked to cry, old men carrying nothing at all because there had been no time to decide what was worth carrying. Everyone moving with the particular silent haste of people who no longer trusted the ground they were walking on to stay solid beneath them. They did not ask the harbour watch for shelter. They asked, almost to a person, the same single question, in the same flat, ruined voice. "Where is the Lord who unmakes things?" As though the only safety left in the world might be standing closer, not farther, from the one power on the island that matched what had come for them in the dark. By the time the first riders reached Blackflint's harbour with the news, the sun was fully up, and somewhere across a grey and indifferent sea, the thing that had done it was already being folded back into its cage, patient, satisfied, waiting to be asked to do it again. Kai crossed to Hollow Reach himself, against every argument Wren and Thrace and even Sale made against it, because he had learned, a year ago, that some horrors could not be governed from a safe distance without becoming, eventually, someone else's problem to have survived. He wished, within the first hour, that he had listened to them. The thing about the dead of Hollow Reach was not that they were dead. Kai had seen death, had caused some of it himself, had held dead while the last of him went out of his body on a cold stone floor. What Hollow Reach showed him was something else. The bodies were not merely killed. They were unmade, in small and large and utterly wrong measures. A hand missing entirely where an arm remained whole. A wall standing with a doorway that had simply ceased to be a doorway and become nothing, an absence with edges. It was his own gift, wearing someone else's hand, practiced badly, cruelly, without the one thing that had ever kept Kai's own hunger from becoming exactly this. No witness, no one who loved the thing doing it enough to be afraid for it, and stay anyway. "This is what Ka was afraid of," Wren said quietly, beside him, her spies' calm cracking for the first time since Kai had known her. "Not soldiers with swords. This." She crouched by what had been a doorway and was now only a clean, geometric wrongness in a stone wall. "He's not building an army, Kai. He's building a plague that happens to look like people." Kai stood very still in the ruined square, feeling the ring on his own hand, feeling, and this was the part he would not say aloud to Wren, not yet, not until he had found a way to say it that did not sound like the beginning of the end of him. Feeling something in his chest recognize the shape of what had been done here. Not approve of it. Recognize it. The way you recognize your own handwriting on a letter you don't remember writing. "I need everyone alive," he said finally, who saw one of them and lived. Every account, every detail. If this is what he's sending ahead of the ships, I need to know how it thinks before it's standing in front of me. The council that convened that evening was not the council of the morning before. Fear had gotten into the room ahead of them, the particular fear of men who had spent 300 years believing distance was a kind of safety and had just learned, in the space of one burned village, that the ocean was no longer doing the job they had always assumed it would. 41 dead, Oren said, and for once there was no theatre in his voice, only a rawness that made him almost sympathetic. 41, in one night, by a thing that came ashore without a ship, and you. He turned on Kai with something closer to genuine terror than the calculated contempt he usually wore. You stood in the ruins and told us it recognized you. Recognized you, boy. Explain to this council why we should not read that as a confession. Because recognizing a wound is not the same as causing it, Sale said, before Kai could answer, and there was an edge in his usually glacial voice that Kai had never heard there before. I was at Hollow Reach an hour behind him. I have seen what the binding was built to prevent, Oren, and I am telling you plainly, as the man who holds the knife at this boy's back, the man with every reason in the world to want to distrust him. That is not what he does. That is what happens when the same gift is taken from someone and handed to a stranger with no mercy sewn into the wound. It is not his crime. It is his warning. A warning, Lord Gaul said slowly. Or a preview. The room went very quiet at that, because it was the first time anyone had said aloud the thing every person in the hall had been thinking since the riders arrived. That Hollow Reach might not have been an attack at all, in the ordinary sense. It might have been a demonstration, aimed less at the island than at one boy standing in it, a promise of exactly what would happen to everyone Kai had ever tried to protect if he continued answering cruelty with mercy. Thrace, who had said nothing through the whole exchange, finally set both hands flat on the long table, the gesture of a soldier done listening to men argue about a war none of them had ever fought. Then here is what a preview requires of us. If we're finally going to call it that instead of a tragedy, we can afford to mourn slowly, she said. Hollow Reach had no wall worth the name and a watch of 6 tired men. Blackflint has neither the excuse nor the luxury. I want every harbour approach lit and watched through the night, starting tonight, not after the council finishes debating whose fault the last village was. I want the lower town given somewhere to run that isn't the sea, because the sea is exactly where the last attack came from, wearing no ship at all. And I want it understood, by every house at this table, that 6 days is not a season to spend arguing about a boy's loyalty. It is a season to spend making sure that when the thing that unmade Hollow Reach comes ashore here, it finds something harder to unmake than a fishing village went to sleep in. You speak as though the council's caution and the island's defense were separate matters, Oren said stiffly. I speak as though I have buried soldiers before, and you have only ever buried arguments, Thrace said, without heat, which somehow made it land harder than if she had shouted it. Caution is a fine thing to practice on an enemy who intends to negotiate. Vess has already told us, in a burned boat and a dead village, that he does not. She looked at Kai, briefly, something like an apology in it for the room she was about to say it in front of. I have sworn my sword to his house, not because I trust the boy blindly, my lords, because I have looked at what's coming, and I would rather stand next to the one power on this island built to answer it than spend my last free hours deciding whether I'm allowed to. Wren stood. Then let's be precise about what's actually being asked of this council, she said, and her voice carried the particular flatness of a woman who had run out of patience for softer language. Not whether Kai is dangerous. You've asked that question for a year and gotten the same answer every time. The question is whether this island is going to spend the 6 days it has left arguing about a boy who has done nothing but bury the people he loves for your safety. or whether it's going to use those 6 days to prepare for the thing that's actually coming. She looked around the table, and for once even Oren had nothing ready to throw back at her. Hollow Reach wasn't a message for the Council. It was a message for him, which means the Council is not the target here. It's the audience. Act like it. They had recovered one of the things in the end. Not alive, not exactly, but not entirely gone either. A body the watch had managed to pin under a collapsed beam long enough for whatever animated it to finally, mercifully, stop. Wren examined it in the same low, candle-lit room where they had questioned Corin 3 nights before, and this time it was Sail who stood in the doorway watching, and Thrace beside him, with her hand never leaving her sword hilt. "It was a soldier once," Wren said quietly, working with the careful, clinical distance she used when getting too close to a horror would break something she needed intact. "You can still see it, under what's been done. Empire conscription markings here, on the collarbone. A man, Sail. A real man, with a real life, before someone decided he'd make useful raw material." She peeled back a section of skin near the sternum with a precision that made even Thrace look away, and beneath it, faint and silver and unmistakably familiar, ran a lattice of fine wire. The same craft, the same cruel, elegant engineering as the promise thread sewn into Corin's coat. "The same hand made both of these," Wren said. "The leash on Corin, and whatever this is. Vess isn't experimenting with 2 different crafts. He's refining one. Corin was the gentle version, a leash a man can survive wearing if he obeys it. This," she gestured at the ruined thing on the table, "this is what happens when the wire isn't asking for obedience anymore. It's asking for hunger, and it's not leaving anything of the person behind to argue with it." Sail's jaw tightened. "How many of these do you believe he has?" "I don't know," Wren admitted, "but I know how patient the letter was. 6 months of failed grafts, Core told us. 6 months of screaming, in cages, until he found a version stable enough to send ashore and still get a result he could be pleased with." She set down her tools, and for the first time that night her hands were not entirely steady. "He didn't send his best weapon to Hollow Reach, Sail. He sent a working prototype, which means whatever's coming on those ships is the version he's satisfied with." There was one thing more, and she made herself say it plainly, because half-truths in that room had already cost enough. "It wasn't hunting on its own, either. I found a channel in the wire. Not craft I fully understand, but craft I recognize the shape of, because it's cousin to what's sewn into Corin's coat. Something was listening through it. Watching, at least. Possibly steering." She looked up, and the candlelight did nothing kind to the fear in her face. "Hollow Reach may not have been left to its own hunger at all, Sail. It may have been walked through that village, room by room, by someone very far away who wanted to feel exactly how much damage his new toy could do without ever risking his own hand near the blood." Thrace's knuckles had gone white on her sword hilt. "You're telling me he watched?" "I'm telling you, I can't prove he didn't," Wren said quietly. "And on an island that's about to gamble everything on how well we understand this man, I would rather tell you the frightening possibility than the comfortable one, and be wrong." It was well past midnight when Fen found Kai still awake in the hall, hunched over the survivors' accounts by a single guttering candle, and the boy's face in the low light had the particular grey look of someone who had been crying and was trying very hard to be finished with it before anyone noticed. "You should be asleep," Kai said, not unkindly. "I keep thinking about Pell," Fen said, before he could stop himself, and then looked immediately as though he wished he hadn't. "Sorry, my lord. I didn't know him. I only know what people say. But they say he believed in you before anyone else did, and he died for standing near you. And I keep thinking—" His voice cracked, just slightly, on the edge of the sentence he clearly hadn't meant to finish out loud. I keep thinking that's going to be me. That I picked the wrong house to believe in, the way he did. And it's going to end the same way. And I don't know how to stop being afraid of that. And also, not leave. Kai set down the account he was reading, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, because the boy deserved an answer built out of more than easy comfort. I can't promise you it won't be you, he said finally, low and honest, in a way he had never quite managed to be with Fen before. I promised myself, after Pell, that I'd never lie about that to anyone who chose to stand near this house. It's dangerous. It might get more dangerous before it gets less. I could lose people I love to what's coming, and there's a real chance you're one of the people I could lose. He held the boy's frightened eyes. But here's the other true thing, Fen, the one I didn't understand until I'd already buried Dad. The danger was never the reason people like Pell, like Dad, like you, came to this house. You didn't come here because it was safe. You came here because it's the only house on this island that ever told a no-crown boy his name was worth writing down. He nodded at the ledger, sitting closed on the table between them. That's what you're actually risking your life for, if it comes to that. Not me. The idea that a name like yours gets written down and remembered in a world that spent 300 years pretending people like us don't have names worth keeping. He managed something that was almost a smile. I think that's worth being afraid for. I don't think it's worth running from. Fen was quiet a long moment, wiping his face with the back of one thin hand. Write it down then, he said finally, unsteady but resolute, pushing the ledger back toward Kai. Whatever happens, write it down honestly. That's the only thing I'm actually asking for, my lord. Not to be safe, just not to be forgotten. Kai went down into the dark near dawn, unable to sleep, and found the old voice weaker than it had been even the night before, thinner, more distant, like a candle burning down toward the last inch of its own wick. You saw Hollow Reach, Kor said, before Kai could speak. I feel it on you, child. The recognition. You are afraid of what you felt standing in those ruins. I recognized it, Kai admitted, and saying it aloud in the dark, to the one person who might actually understand what it cost him to say, felt like setting down something heavy he had been carrying since the moment he'd stood in that ruined square. Not the cruelty, the shape of it. It felt like my own hand, doing something I've never let it do. Because it is your own gift, child, wearing a stranger's grief instead of yours, Kor said. That is the whole of what I have spent 300 years trying to make you understand, and I fear I am running out of nights left to say it. As many times as you will need to hear it before it finally sits still in you. The old voice softened, and there was something in it Kai had never heard before. Not just weariness now, but a kind of confession, long overdue. I told you once that I cut my own house in half, 300 years ago, to save the gentle branch of it. I did not tell you what the cutting cost the half I did not save. Kai went very still. Tell me now. My brother, Kor said, and the word came out cracked, ancient grief finally finding its true shape after 3 centuries of being spoken around instead of through. Not metaphor, child. Blood. We were both born to the gift, and only one of us could be taught to carry it gently, because gentleness is not inherited. It is chosen, over and over. And my brother chose wrong once. In a moment of grief too large for him, the way you nearly did the night you opened the hunger all the way to save your wren.
He did not have a witness in that moment. I was not there. And by the time I found him, there was no version of my brother left to save. Only the hunger wearing his shape, exactly the way it wears the shape of the poor conscripted men in Vess's cages now. A long, ragged pause. I did what needed doing. I have called it a mercy for 300 years, in the dark, alone. And I have never once let myself say the other true word for it. Until tonight, to you. Because I think you deserve to know the whole cost of the faith you're carrying, before you carry it into whatever is coming.
His voice broke, hollow and ancient, and for the first time, entirely human.
I killed him, child. My own brother. And I built a religion out of never doing it again, and called every gentle ash after him a mercy owed to a debt I could never actually repay.
He had a kindness in him, before, Kor said, into the long silence that followed, as though he could not stop now that the wound had finally been let open. That is the part I have never told anyone, in 300 years, because it was mine to carry, and no one else's to be burdened by. My brother taught me to swim, child, in a cove not so different from the one where you buried your steward. He was patient with me, in a way our own father never was, and when I finally found him, after, in the ruin of what the hunger had made of him, some small, terrible part of him was still in there, still fighting it, still trying to find his way back to being the brother who had taught a frightened boy to swim. His voice dropped to something almost too quiet to hear. That is the detail I have never forgiven myself for. Not that I ended him, that some part of him was still present enough, in the very last moment, to look grateful that I had. Kai stood in the dark, tears he hadn't expected finding his face, understanding for the first time the true weight of the faith he had inherited, not an abstract principle, but a wound 300 years old, still bleeding, in the one voice that had guided him through all of it. "That's why you're so afraid of what Vess is doing," Kai whispered. "That is why I cannot bear it," Kor said. "Because he is making my brother's mistake on purpose, at scale, for profit, and calling it strategy. And I am running out of nights to help you stop him from making 100 of my brother on a beach, with no one there to love any of them enough to stay." The old voice was fading now, visibly, audibly, the strength going out of it like tide going out of a shore. "Go and rest, child, while you still can. And when you go to face him, because you will, I have known that since the letter arrived, take the whole truth with you, not the faith, the cost underneath it. He should know exactly what he's asking you to become, and exactly what it took the last man who tried it to survive choosing otherwise." Wren worked on Corin's promise thread until her hands shook from more than the cold, in the last hour before the signal was due, with Thrace standing guard at the door and Sale watching in a silence that had, over 3 days, become something closer to genuine respect than either of them would have predicted. "I can't cut it," Wren said finally, low and furious at her own limits. "Not clean, not in the time we have. But I don't need to cut it. I need to lie to it." She held up the fragment of glass from the burned boat, matched now, after 3 days of careful work, to the pulse of the wire beneath Corin's collar. "It reads intent, not words exactly. It's tuned to the shape of obedience, the feel of a man trying to stay inside the lines he's been given. So I'm not going to make him disobey it. I'm going to make obedience itself carry the second message, folded so deep inside the first that the wire can't tell the difference." She looked up at Corin, who had gone very pale in the candlelight, waiting. "It's going to hurt. I won't lie to you about that. But I don't think it will kill you, and I think it's the only way to get Kai's answer across that water without asking you to die for delivering it." Corin closed his eyes and nodded, and did not flinch when she began. The signal, when it finally went out into the black water past the reef, looked from a distance like nothing at all. A small, ordinary light, flashing an ordinary rhythm, the kind of thing a tired sailor might send without a second thought. Corin held very still through the whole of it, jaw locked, sweat running despite the cold, and when it was finished, he did not collapse, though every line of him looked as though he wanted to. "It's done," he said, hoarse. "Both messages, his and yours." He looked at Wren with something that had not been in his face since the sand, something that, in a ruined, exhausted way, looked almost like hope. "Thank you. Whatever happens now, my lord, my lady, thank you for treating me like a man worth saving, instead of a weapon that had already gone off." It was Thrace, watching from the doorway, who said what none of them had wanted to say first. "He'll know we tampered with it," she said quietly. "The moment his people read that second message, he'll know exactly how close we came to freeing his messenger out from under him. That's not going to make him patient, Wren. That's going to make him move." It came 2 hours before dawn, while the exhausted household finally slept, and it came the way Hollow Reach had come, quietly, from close by, already inside the walls before the watch understood there was anything to sound an alarm about. Fen woke to a sound wrong enough to pull him instantly out of sleep. Not a footstep, not a door, but a kind of silence, the specific absence of every ordinary night noise at once, the way a room goes quiet right before something enters it that does not belong. He did the only thing his 3 weeks of training had taught him to do. He screamed for the house, as loud as his thin chest could manage, and then he ran for Kai's door instead of his own safety. Because some instinct older than 3 weeks of service told him that whatever this was, it had not come for him at all. It had come for the ledger. Kai reached the hall in time to see the shape of it, not quite human, not quite the ruined thing Wren had examined on the table. Something between, stable in a way Hollow Reach's attacker had not been, controlled in a way that suggested this was not a demonstration but a reconnaissance, sent specifically, deliberately, to take something small and irreplaceable, rather than to kill indiscriminately. It had the ledger in one hand, House Ash's whole short, costly history, Debt's careful entries, and Fen's frightened new ones. The only written record of every debt Kai's house had ever owed and tried to pay. Kai did not think. He reached for the hunger, the whole terrible, easy width of it, the same door he had opened once before to save Wren, and had promised himself, and Sail, and Kor, he would never open again, except as an absolute last resort. And Fen threw himself between Kai and the shape, small and thin, and utterly, foolishly brave, not for the ledger, but because he had understood, faster than anyone else in that hall, exactly what it would cost Kai to open that door again so soon, so easily, without a witness steady enough to hold him back from going all the way through it. "Don't," the boy said, to Kai, not to the shape at all. "Don't do what he wants. I'll get it back. Just don't." The shape moved. Thrace reached them first, her wall of blue, exactly where she had promised to stand, and her blade took the shape through what had once been a shoulder, and it did not bleed so much as unmake. A clean, silent absence where an arm should have resisted the cut, and did not, because whatever obedience had been grafted into it did not include the instinct for self-preservation anymore. It dropped the ledger. It did not drop Fen, whom it had already, in the single heartbeat before Thrace's blade found it, back-handed across the hall with a strength no ordinary conscript should have carried. The shape itself came apart entirely under Thrace's second cut, folding into the same clean, geometric wrongness Kai had seen in Hollow Reach's doorway, and was gone, leaving nothing behind to interrogate, nothing to learn from. only silence, and the ledger lying open on the cold floor, and Fen very still against the far wall. He was alive. That was the mercy the night allowed them, though it did not feel, in the terrible minutes before the healer arrived, like very much of one. Fen's breathing shallow and wrong, one arm bent at an angle arms were not built to bend, blood dark against the stone under his head. Kai knelt beside him with the ledger clutched, unthinking, to his own chest, and understood, in the cold, clear way he had understood it once before, over a body at the bottom of a sea stair, exactly what message this had actually been. Not an attempt to kill him. A demonstration of what Ves was willing to spend, again, to prove a point. That mercy shown to a fisherman's daughter across the water could be answered, precisely and pointedly, by violence shown to a boy across a hall, so that Kai would understand, in his own house, under his own banner, exactly how easily the people he loved could be made to pay for every choice he made to stay gentle. "He's not fighting a war," Ren said, white-faced, kneeling on Fen's other side, pressing a cloth to the wound with hands that would not entirely stop shaking. "He's running the same experiment on you that he's running in those cages, Kai. He wants to know exactly how much he has to take from you before the mercy runs out, and the hunger answers instead." Kai looked down at the boy who had thrown himself, deliberately, foolishly, between a monster and the one thing House Ash owned that could not be replaced, and felt something in his chest go very quiet and very certain, in a way that frightened him more than the hunger itself ever had. Sale arrived not long after the healer, still in his bedclothes under a hastily thrown coat, which was itself so unlike him that Kai understood, before a word was spoken, exactly how badly the news had travelled through the White House. He stood over Fen's still, bandaged form for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had none of its usual careful distance in it at all. "I have spent a year telling myself that watching this house was a duty," Sale said quietly, to no one in particular, or perhaps to himself. "That the boy I bound might, in time, prove worth the risk his house represented, and that I would know, when the moment came, precisely how to weigh what I saw." He looked at Fen, so young and so still on the makeshift bed, and something moved behind his pale, controlled eyes that Kai had never once seen there before. "I did not account for children throwing themselves in front of monsters to protect a ledger. That was not in any of the calculations I made, a year ago, about what this house might cost the island." He turned to Kai, and for once there was no performance in it at all. "I came to see whether the binding had failed tonight. It occurs to me now that I came to ask the wrong question. The binding was never going to fail, boy. I understand that now. What I should have been asking, all along, is what it costs you to keep it whole, on nights like this one, when everything in you must have wanted to answer in kind." Ren, still kneeling with Fen's small bandaged hand in both of hers, did not look up, but her voice, when it came, was steadier than it had any right to be. "It costs him everything, Sale. Every single time. That's the part your council has never once thought to put in its ledgers." She smoothed the hair back from Fen's pale forehead, gentle in a way that had nothing of the sharp Moran spy left in it at all. "Stay, or go report to your crowns. But if you stay, you watch what it actually looks like, up close, before you vote on it again." Sale stayed. "Then he's about to learn," Kai said, low, "that he asked the wrong question." The report reached the Black Hall before the caged shape's fragments had finished settling on the harbour stone an ocean away, carried across some old craft of Ves's own devising that did not require ships or messengers at all, only patience, and the wire that had once, briefly, belonged to a soldier's collarbone. Ves listened to it in full, the ledger, the boy who had thrown himself in the way of it, the wound, the survival, and said nothing for a long time, standing before the newest and largest of the cages, where something not quite finished yet strained, silent and patient, against bars built to hold considerably more than it currently was. "He didn't open the hunger," Vess said at last, and there was something in the voice that was not quite disappointment and not quite admiration, but adjacent to both, turning slowly into something colder than either. Even for the boy, even with the ledger in the creature's hand and a child bleeding on his floor. He held it. A long pause, thoughtful, almost hungry itself. That is either the deepest mercy I have ever heard of, or the most patient kind of cowardice. And I confess, across 6 months of cages and screaming and failure after failure, I have started to lose the ability to tell those two things apart in myself, let alone in him. The servant, kneeling, did not look up. "There is a second matter, my lord. The tampered signal from the messenger, Corin. Our code readers have finished the full translation of the hidden portion." "Read it." The servant's voice shook, very slightly, reading words that were plainly not meant to be read aloud in that hall to that throne. "It says, 'He is more afraid of becoming you than he is of you. That is the whole of his weakness, and the whole of his strength. And if you are as patient as you claim to be, you will understand, before the ships arrive, that you cannot win by proving him dangerous. You can only lose by proving yourself right.'" Silence, long and total, filled the black hall. Vess turned, at last, from the cage, and something had shifted in the ancient, hungry patience of that face. Not doubt, not yet, but the first thin crack where doubt might, given time and enough cost, eventually be permitted to grow. "Move the ships," Vess said finally, quiet and cold and absolutely final. "All of them. Not the vanguard. All of them. I find I no longer wish to conduct this experiment in careful, patient stages." A pause, and the voice that followed was almost uncertain. "I would like to see, with my own eyes, which of us is right, before either of us has the luxury of more time to become certain of it from a safe and comfortable distance."